How's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode. Today we'll make a Biga pizza. Biga is simply a pre-ferment, and whilst normally only a portion of the total flour is pre-fermented, in this case we're pre-fermenting all of the flour. So the dough itself is the pre-ferment, and that will give this dough an extra nice flavor. Plus it's pretty simple to make. So if you are into your pizza, then this one should be definitely on your list. It's absolutely perfect. I mean, look at those bubbles in the crust. And this is not a high hydration dough, so it's pretty easy to handle as well. So let's get to it. We'll need some strong white bread flour for this, and some water, yeast, salt, and a bit of olive oil. And that's all you need for the dough. I'll also show you how to make a sauce later on. I'll also need a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, and a temperature probe. I will use my pizza paddle to move the pizza onto my pizza stone. But trust me, this is not totally necessary. If you don't have these things, you can still make this pizza. You can use a cast iron skillet like this one. A thick solid base is best for baking on. If you don't have a thick tray, simply use a normal tray with a piece of paper. So with that out of the way, let's start making our pre-ferment. My water is around 17 to 18 degrees Celsius. I don't want this to overproof. I'm going to use 2 tiny pinches of yeast. This will make the dough ferment in around 12 hours. If you want to extend the fermentation, simply use less yeast. Let it hydrate for a minute, mix it up a little bit. You always want to dissolve your yeast before adding the flour. Now it's worth noting that I'm not using all of the water. We need to reserve a little bit to add the rest of the yeast later on. But we are definitely using all of the flour at this point. Because it is 100% Biga, 100% pre-ferment, we are pre-fermenting 100% of all the flour. At this point, all we need to do is mix this dough until there's no more dry flour left. So start it off in the bowl and then tip it out on your table and knead it for a little bit. We are not kneading this dough to develop any gluten, we are simply kneading it to get rid of any dry flour. If the flour is dry and not mixed properly with the water and yeast, then it's not going to ferment and then there's no point to a Biga. So knead it for a minute until it's nice and even, and now we can start fermenting it. There are various types of pre-ferments in baking. A Biga is a stiff pre-ferment. It means that it has a low water content. This one's about 50%. And low hydration pre-ferments are normally more forgiving. It's difficult to mess them up. So I'd say this is definitely a beginner-friendly recipe. It's pretty much foolproof. So I'll give this 12 hours. As you can see, it's puffing up nicely. I can make the sauce while I wait. And this is super simple. Some good quality chopped tomatoes, some olive oil, garlic, salt and oregano. Get your pan on medium heat, add the oil and the garlic. Also add the salt at this point. You want to cook this on medium heat for around 5 minutes, until it starts coloring. But do keep an eye on it, you don't want your garlic to burn, it'll taste bitter. And once the garlic's nicely brown, you can add the oregano and the tomatoes. Then stir it up, bring it up to a boil, turn the heat down a little bit and keep cooking. It'll take around 15 more minutes and it's done. Pretty simple, right? And of course you don't have to make your own sauce. You could simply buy some sauce. Or use your own version. It is actually quite common not to cook the sauce at all. Simply blitz the tomatoes with some ingredients and use it for your pizza. You may have noticed I added a cheeky pinch of chili flakes, just because I like it. But that's how you make the easiest tomato sauce ever. Now leave it on the side to cool down completely. You can also blitz it up with a blender to make it smoother if you want. But this one's smooth enough for me. Now let's continue on with the dough. Look at that, it's nicely puffed up. When I poke it with my finger, it leaves a nice indentation. Now we are ready to add the rest of the ingredients. So grab your oil, salt, the yeast and the water, add the yeast to the water and give it a minute to hydrate. And now simply add all the ingredients to the pre-ferment. And make sure to mix the yeast up. There might be some lumps and you want to avoid that. As you can see, this is a super simple process. Now once you added all the ingredients, wet your hand with some water and rub the salt in just to dissolve it a little bit. And then start squeezing everything together. Really go for it. Put some elbow grease in it. You want to press it, squeeze it, mash it up until it's more or less combined. So we are increasing the hydration right now. So from this point on, the dough will become a little bit more sticky and there will be a slightly different method when we go to knead it. To knead a dough like this, we're going to use the stretch and fold method. Once again, wet your hands with water lightly, then pick the dough up by one side, stretch it against the table towards yourself and fold it over forwards. And you always want to pick it up by the side and turn it 90 degrees before stretching and folding it. This will give the folds a crisscross pattern, making them more effective. And if you have never done this before, a few tries and the motion will become fluent, don't worry. And if the dough sticks to your hands and to the table, simply scrape it all up again and continue. You want to keep kneading this for around 8 minutes in total. And this looks about right to me. It's nice and stretchy and not too sticky anymore. But don't get me wrong, it's still sticky, so wet your hands when handling it. Now let's clean up this mess and wash our hands and continue. Pop the dough into a bowl and take its temperature. Around 24 to 25 degrees Celsius is what I'm after. If your dough is warmer or if your kitchen is warmer, it may ferment more rapidly, and if it's cooler, it may take longer. So adjust the proofing times accordingly. I'm going to cover this up and leave it for 1 hour, and then I'm going to give it a fold. And more specifically, I'm going to give it a coil fold. So the way you do this is pick it up by the sides, always wet your hands so they don't stick, release the dough from the bowl, and you want to roll it underneath itself. This will create extra layers in the dough and make it stronger, make the pizza keep its shape better. And once you rolled it a couple times on one side, turn it round and roll it again. And to finish, what I like to do is pick the dough up and push the sides into the middle and up. This puts even more tension in the dough and prevents the folds from coming undone. I'm going to pop this back in the bowl. I'll give it 1 more hour. And that's it, just 2 hours of total fermentation, we're ready to divide it. This is pretty quick, right? I mean, I'm not counting the time that you have to wait for the pre-ferment, because you can make that in the evening, it will be ready by the next day. Okay, so to divide your dough, dust your table with flour, dust your hands as well to prevent any stickage, and then using your scraper, cut it down to size. This recipe makes 2 10-inch pizzas, so I'm simply dividing it in half. After dividing, we need to shape them into balls. It's pretty simple. Flatten the dough out, fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until reach the point where you started. Then flip it upside down so the smooth side is pointing up, and tighten it against the table. That's your shaping done. This dough is just a little bit sticky, and the best way to handle a sticky dough is quickly and with a light touch. I only need a little bit of flour. If you use too much, then your dough might not stick to itself, and then you won't be able to shape it properly. Now grab a tray or a plate, dust that with a bit of flour, place your dough balls on it, cover them up, and we can leave them for the final fermentation. And if you wanted to, from this point you could cover them up and pop them in the fridge. That way you can extend the fermentation, and it may give you greater control of when to bake them. They will survive in the fridge for up to 18 hours if you do decide to refrigerate them. I'm going to leave them out, and they'll take around 1 hour to 1.5 hours. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat your oven to as high as it goes, minus 250 degrees, but do switch the fan off. And if you are using a pizza stone or cast iron pan, then preheat them too. Now here comes the fun part, the shaping. Dust your table with flour, make sure you have a little bit of flour to hand. Don't use too much, as it's easier to add than to take off. And now we want to stretch the dough, gently. What I like to do is, starting from one side, press it with my fingertips towards the edge. Then turn it 90 degrees and repeat. But don't press your fingers all the way to the edge. We want to get that nice puffy crust. But there's only so far you can go with pressing it with your fingers. There are other methods to continue. You can use the palms of your hands and gently rotate it and stretch it at the same time. And yeah, this takes some practice, but if this is a little bit too advanced for you, then you can do this. Pick the dough up and place it on your knuckles. Clench your hands in a fist and simply rotate the dough and let gravity do the work. The main thing to remember when handling a dough like this is whenever you pick it up to move it around, use the flat parts of your hands. Use your fists, use your palms, or the back of your hand. You should never pick it up with your fingertips, because that way you just poke a hole in the dough, and you don't want that. Now when it comes to the sauce, less is more. A couple of tablespoons will be enough. And that goes with any ingredient. You don't want to overload your pizza, otherwise you'll just end up with a puddle in the middle. I'm gonna finish this with some mozzarella and a bit of parmesan. And last but not least, a little pinch of oregano, always adds a nice flavor. Using a pizza paddle takes a bit of practice. So if you don't feel comfortable with doing it, well, you need to practice. Or simply use a piece of parchment paper. I like to dust my paddle to prevent any stickage. But I am a bit rusty, so this did not go to plan. But there's always a solution. Simply grab the pizza and pull it onto the paddle. And it's always a good idea to stretch it out a little bit more once it's on the paddle, because it will want to pull itself together again as you slide it into the oven. Now whenever you're sliding your pizza into the oven, make sure to give it a quick shake. If it's stuck and not moving, you might as well return to the table, because you will make a mess. But if you succeeded, close the door and bake your pizza. Mine took around 8 minutes. If it's darkening on one side more than on the other, then you can turn it around halfway through the bake. And that's how you make 100% Biga pizza. Pretty simple, right? Have you ever tried this before? Let me know down in comments. And what's your favorite pizza? And of course, as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, also let me know. And don't forget to subscribe and click that bell button for more awesome bread videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.